My sister walked down the aisle in a dress I paid for, at a venue I co-signed the contract for, surrounded by flowers I helped choose, and I sat at table 11, next to the DJ booth and a couple she'd invited from her gym, who didn't even know her middle name. That's not the part that broke me, though. The part that broke me was that when the photographer came around to collect family portraits, my mother waved him toward the head table and said, "Just immediate family for now." And nobody corrected her, not my sister, not my father, not a single person in that room who knew exactly what I had done to make that day possible. I'm Nadia, I'm 31 years old. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment in Charlotte, North Carolina, that I pay for entirely on my own, which is more than I can say for anyone else in my family. I work in healthcare administration. I'm not rich. But I've always been the one who figures it out, the one who finds the money, shuffles the accounts, makes the calls. And for a long time, my family called that being a team player. I called it being the only one who showed up. Growing up, my mother had a phrase she pulled out whenever she needed something from me. "We take care of each other." She said it the way people say grace before a meal, reflexively, without really meaning it. I believed it anyway. I was 18 the first time I wired money home, still living in my freshman dorm, eating dining hall pasta 5 nights a week. My sister had gotten into some trouble with her car insurance, a fender bender she hadn't disclosed to my parents, and the cost was coming due. My mother called on a Thursday evening and within 3 sentences had arrived at the point. "We take care of each other, right?" I transferred $400 before I went to sleep. That was the beginning of a pattern I wouldn't name for another 12 years. By the time I was 25, I had co-signed 2 credit cards, 1 apartment lease and a personal loan, all for my sister. I had covered my father's hospital deductible when he had his gallbladder out, paid 3 months of my parents' utility bills when my father was between jobs, and quietly settled the collections. Notice my mother didn't want my father to find out about. None of it was framed as debt. It was always just for now, or until things settle, or the classic, "You know we'd do the same for you." The thing about growing up as the capable one in a family that isn't, is that you start to believe your capability is the price of admission. You think, well, someone has to. And since I was the one who always figured it out, I was the one who always got asked. My sister Brenly was 4 years younger than me, and had never once in her adult life paid a bill on time. She was charming and pretty, and chronically in some kind of low-grade financial crisis, that my parents treated with the same concern they'd give a parking ticket. Frustrating, but someone else's problem to fix. That someone was always me. They never called it what it was, they dressed it up in softness. "She's still figuring herself out. She's sensitive, you know how she is. You're so much stronger than her, sweetheart. She needs more support." I was 28 when Brenly started dating a man named Caspian. He was 36, worked in sales, and had a habit of making large confident statements about money, without ever seeming to have any. Within 8 months they were engaged. My mother called me before she called anyone else in the family. "Isn't it wonderful?" she said, and I could hear her smiling through the phone. "That's fast," I said. "She's happy, that's what matters." I asked about his job. My mother said he was between opportunities but very entrepreneurial. I knew what that meant. I'd been hearing that phrase out at my sister's boyfriends for a decade. The engagement party was at my parents' house. My mother asked me if I could help cover the catering, just temporarily. I wrote a check for $1,500. Nobody toasted me, nobody mentioned it. Brenly hugged Caspian in the kitchen while my mother told anyone who would listen what a wonderful couple they made, how supportive the family had been, how grateful she was. I refilled the chip bowl and smiled and told myself this was normal. This was what families did. The wedding planning started immediately. Brenly had been collecting venue ideas for years. Screenshots, Pinterest boards, a folder on her phone she'd shown me once that was organised by price range. The venue she chose was a renovated farmhouse outside the city, the kind with string lights, and a bridal suite and a catering minimum that made my eyes water. She asked me to co-sign the contract because her credit score couldn't get her the booking. "It's just on paper," she said. "Caspian will handle everything. You won't actually owe anything." I should have said no. I knew, even as I was signing, that I should have said no. But she was sitting across from me at our mother's kitchen table, and my mother was next to her looking at me with that expression, the one that meant "don't ruin this," and I signed. Over the next 14 months, I tracked what I spent on that wedding, the way some people track calories. Not obsessively, just quietly, the way you do when something feels off and you're not ready to say it out loud. The dress alterations I paid for when Brenly's account was overdrawn. The florist deposit my mother asked me to lend her when Caspian's check bounced. The rehearsal dinner, technically shared between my parents and Caspian's family, But when his parents backed out at the last minute, my mother called me and said she didn't know what to do, and somehow that meant I did. By the week before the wedding, I had spent just over $23,000 on an event I had not been consulted about, for a marriage I had serious reservations about, and in which I had been assigned the role of helpful older sister without a single conversation about whether that was a role I wanted. The morning of the wedding, I was in the bridal suite helping Brenly into her dress, the one we'd driven to 3 different boutiques to find, the one I'd paid to have taken in at the waist, when she looked at me in the mirror and said, "You're going to cry, aren't you? You always cry." I wasn't going to cry, but I smiled and said yes because it was easier. "Thank you for being here," she said, and I almost believed she meant it. I found out about table 11 from the seating chart, which I saw for the first time 2 days before the wedding when my mother forwarded it to me for a quick look. I scrolled through it on my phone while eating lunch at my desk and had to stop and zoom in to confirm what I was reading. My name. Table 11. The table in the corner, farthest from the head table, tucked beside the speaker equipment, and a row of chairs that had been placed there in case of overflow. I called my mother. She answered on the second ring. "Did you see the layout?" she asked before I could say anything. "Isn't it beautiful?" "Mom, I'm at table 11. A pause. "It's a lovely table, sweetheart. You'll be near the dance floor. I'm near the DJ. I'm with people I've never met. Brenly wanted the immediate family seated together for the speeches. You understand?" I did not understand. "I am immediate family." "Of course you are. It's just, Caspian's family is very large, and she wanted to keep it balanced." You're so easygoing. I knew you wouldn't mind." I minded. I said I'd see her at the ceremony and hung up. The wedding was beautiful. I will not pretend it wasn't. The farmhouse looked like something out of a magazine. The string lights were perfect. Brenly was radiant. Caspian cried during the vows, which made everyone in the room forget for a moment that he'd never kept a steady job for longer than 2 years. My mother sat at the front and dabbed at her eyes and looked like the picture of a grateful, proud mother of the bride. During the cocktail hour, I watched my parents move through the room together, introducing themselves to Caspian's relatives, laughing, telling stories. My father, who rarely talked, was animatedly describing a family trip we'd taken to the Outer Banks when Brenly and I were kids. He hadn't mentioned that trip in years. He made it sound like a golden memory. He did not mention that I'd paid for half of it. I sat at table 11 through the salad course. One of Caspian's gym friends asked what I did and whether I knew the groom well. I said I was the bride's sister. He said, "Oh wow, I didn't even know she had a sister." I smiled and excused myself to get another glass of water. There's a particular kind of invisible that happens in rooms full of people who know your name but not your role. It's not loneliness, exactly. It's more like being a piece of furniture, present, functional, noticed only when something needs to be moved. I stood near the bar for a few minutes and did the math in my head. The farmhouse, the dress, the alterations, the florist, the rehearsal dinner, the engagement party catering, the 4 hotel rooms I'd blocked and paid for because Caspian's aunt and 3 cousins needed somewhere to stay. And no one had thought to budget for it. $23,000, 412 to be precise. I knew the number because I'd written it down. I wrote everything down. The speeches started. My father went first. He talked about Brenly as a little girl, how she'd always known her own mind, how proud he was of the woman she'd become. He said she had always been the heart of the family. He raised his glass to her and Caspian and wished them every happiness. He didn't look at me. He didn't mention me. My mother went next. She talked about sacrifice and love and what it means to build a life with someone. She said that family is the foundation you stand on when the ground shakes, and that she was grateful every day for the family she had built. She looked at Brenly. She looked at Caspian. She looked at my father. She looked at the table where Caspian's parents sat. She did not look at table 11. I left before the last dance. I told no one. I got in my car and drove 30 minutes back to my apartment and sat in the parking garage for a while without turning off the engine. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "Where did you go? Brenly was looking for you for the bouquet toss." I set my phone face down on the passenger seat and just sat there. I didn't cry that night. I opened my laptop instead. I went back through 6 years of bank stamps, transfers, Venmo requests, Zelles receipts. I made a spreadsheet. I labeled it the way you label something you're going to need to find again. Britions, documented. The total, when I finished, was $41,000. The next 2 weeks, I did not call anyone in my family. I told myself it was just distance, that I was processing, that I'd feel differently when the dust settled. But the dust didn't settle. It got thicker. Because 3 weeks after the wedding, my mother called to let me know that Brenly and Caspian were looking at buying a house. "Isn't that exciting?" she said. Good for them, I said. Well, a breath, a pause. The sound of her preparing a sentence she knew I wouldn't like. They found something they love, but Caspian's debt to income is a little high right now, and Brenly's score is still recovering. So we were thinking, just on paper, mind you, maybe you could be listed as a co-borrower. I set down my coffee mug. Just until they can refinance, she continued. It would probably only be a year, 2 at most, and you wouldn't actually be responsible for. Mom, you'd be helping them build equity. That's an investment. Mom, I said it more firmly. No, silence. Real silence, the kind that has weight. I don't understand, she said finally. You co-signed the venue, you've helped so much. Why is this different? Because I'm done, I said. I'm done co-signing things. I'm done covering things. I'm done being the silent infrastructure of this family while everyone else gets to celebrate. Her voice shifted. It got quiet in a way that felt deliberate, controlled. That's a very unfair way to talk about us. Mom, I spent $41,000 supporting this family in the last 6 years. I have records. I have every transfer, every receipt. Another silence. You kept records, she said finally, and the way she said it, like it was shameful, like I'd done something calculating and cold, made my throat tighten. Of course I kept records. I always keep records. She hung up. I sat with the dial tone for a few seconds, then put the phone down and opened my laptop. I typed the name of a real estate attorney into the search bar. Then I thought better of it and searched for a financial rights attorney instead. I had a feeling the issue was bigger than a house. I was right. 3 days after my conversation with my mother, I received an email notification from my credit monitoring service. A new inquiry had been added to my file. I didn't recognize the lender. I logged in and pulled the full report. There it was. A hard credit inquiry from a mortgage company in Charlotte dated 4 days earlier. 2 days before I'd said no to my mother. They had already applied. I called the mortgage company from my parked car in a grocery store lot, hands steady in a way that didn't match how I felt inside. I spoke to a representative named Todd who was very polite and very careful, and told me that yes, my name appeared on a pre-application, and that the application had been submitted but not yet processed. I did not authorize that, I said. He told me I would need to contact their fraud department. I sat in that parking lot for a long time after I hung up, not because I was paralyzed, because I was thinking clearly for the first time in a long time. The wedding, the venue contract, the credit inquiry. The pattern wasn't accidental. It had never been accidental. I called a financial attorney that afternoon. Her name was Dr. Okonkwo. Wait, no, I can't use that name, it's already in my records. Her name was Renata. No, Renata's in the file too. I hired an attorney. She answered on the 3rd ring, asked me to walk her through everything from the beginning, and after 40 minutes said 3 words that I wrote down on a sticky note and kept on my desk for months afterward. This is actionable. We filed a fraud alert with all 3 credit bureaus that week. We sent a formal cease and desist to my mother and sister. We disputed the unauthorized credit inquiry, and my attorney filed a preliminary notice of intent to pursue legal action for unauthorized use of financial identity. Brenly called me the night after she received the paperwork. I let it ring. She called again. I let that ring too. Then she sent a text. Are you seriously doing this? It was just a pre-application. It doesn't even mean anything. I typed back. It means you used my name without asking. Don't do it again. My mother called the next morning. She didn't say hello. She said, "You're humiliating this family." "I'm protecting myself," I said. "You're being dramatic. It was a formality. Using someone's name on a mortgage application without their consent is not a formality. It's fraud. Don't use that word. It's the legal word." She was quiet for a moment. Then, the pivot. The one I had heard in 100 different forms over 100 different phone calls. "Your sister is struggling. She needs stability. You have stability. You've always had stability. Why does it cost you anything to help her?" I had answered that question 100 times. I gave the only answer that had ever been true. Because she never asked me, you just took. The legal process was slow in the way all legal processes are. Grinding, paperwork heavy, full of waiting. My attorney submitted a formal dispute to the mortgage company, which resulted in my name being removed from the pre-application within 2 weeks. The credit inquiry was flagged and disputed. I filed a complaint with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Every step was documented. Every document was dated. Every email was saved. Meanwhile, my mother posted on Facebook, nothing about me by name. She was too careful for that. A vague post about children who forget where they came from. A quote about loyalty. A photograph of her and Brenly at a diner, captioned "Grateful for the ones who show up." I read them all. I forwarded each one to my attorney. She added them to a file she had labelled Pattern of Character. What I didn't expect was the phone call from my father. He called on a Wednesday evening. It was the first time he had called me independently, not at my mother's prompting, not as a formality, in years. He didn't say much. He asked how I was doing. I said fine. He asked if I was eating. I said yes. And then there was a long silence, the kind he was comfortable with in a way I'd never quite learned. And then he said, I knew about the credit thing, before it happened. Your mother mentioned it. I closed my eyes. I told her not to, he said. She did it anyway. I didn't say anything for a moment. Why are you telling me now? Because I should have told her harder. He cleared his throat. I'm sorry I didn't. My father was a man who apologized approximately once per decade, so I understood what it cost him to say it. I didn't tell him it was fine because it wasn't. But I also didn't hang up, and that felt like the most honest response I had. After we said goodbye, I sat on the edge of my bed and read that apology back through my memory 2 or 3 times. The way you read a document you need to understand before signing. He had known. He had objected. He had been overruled and stayed quiet. That was almost worse than not knowing. I wrote it down anyway, not out of spite, just because I'd learned that the truth, even when it's painful, is worth documenting. The case didn't go to trial. What happened instead was a negotiated resolution. My name was removed from the venue contract, which I hadn't realised was still legally unresolved, and Brenly and my mother signed a written acknowledgement that they would not use my name, credit, or financial identity in any capacity without my express written consent. My attorney's word for this was injunctive relief. My word for it was. Finally, I did not attend the signing. My attorney handled it. She called me afterward and said that Brenly had been very quiet throughout, and that my mother had spent most of the meeting staring at a fixed point on the wall. Did she say anything? I asked. She said you bit the hand that fed you. I laughed, genuinely laughed, for the first time in months. I'll note that in the file, my attorney said, and I could hear the dry amusement in her voice. I said, the hand that fed me. I was the one cooking. It was spring by the time the legal process concluded. The kind of spring that arrives in Charlotte all at once. 1 week grey and cold, the next suddenly warm and blooming, like the city just decided to move on. I started walking in the evenings, down through the neighbourhood by the park, past the coffee shop I liked, and the used bookstore that was always playing Joni Mitchell. Small things. Mine. I had dinner with a friend I hadn't seen since the wedding. She asked how I was, and I told her most of it. Not in a venting way, more like a person recounting a thing that happened, that was now behind them. She listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. When I finished, she said, I'm proud of you. And I felt the thing you feel when someone says that and you haven't heard it in a long time. Not just the warmth of it, but the recognition that you've been hungry for it. My relationship with my family was quiet now. Not estranged, just quiet. My mother occasionally sent texts. I responded when I felt like it. My father checked in every few weeks. I always answered those. Brenly had not contacted me since the papers were signed, and I was at peace with that in a way I hadn't expected to be. What I hadn't expected in all of this was the message from my cousin. She was 19, away at college in Tennessee, one of the younger relatives I barely saw, who existed in my life mostly through holiday gatherings and Instagram. She texted me on a Saturday morning. The message was short. I saw what happened. I heard them talking about you like it was nothing. I just wanted to say I think you were right. I'm really glad you didn't let them. I read it 3 times. She was 19, and she had seen it clearly. The thing that everyone older than her had spent years pretending not to notice. I typed back something simple. Thank you, I appreciate that. And then I set my phone down and stood at my kitchen window for a while, looking out at the street below. There's a version of this story where I made peace with my family, where we had a difficult conversation and found our way back to each other, where everyone acknowledged the truth, and we rebuilt something better. That would be a nicer story. I'm not sure it would be an honest one. Here's what I know now at 31, in an apartment I pay for with money I earned. The cost of being needed is not the same as the cost of being loved. For a long time, my family needed me. That felt like love. It wasn't. Love keeps a seat at the table. Love doesn't charge you for entry and then pretend you never came. I still have the spreadsheet. I don't open it very often. But I know it's there. $41,000 of proof that I showed up, that I gave. That I held things together without being asked and without being thanked. Some days I think I should delete it, but then I think about the credit inquiry, about the venue contract, about Table 11. I keep it, because I've learned that the people who call you dramatic for keeping records are usually the ones who needed you not to. A few months after the legal resolution, I started a small financial literacy group for women in my city. Nothing formal, just a monthly meetup at a community centre nearby. Women who had been the capable one, the reliable one, the one who figured it out. We talked about credit, about co-signing, about the difference between helping and being used, about knowing the difference before you're $41,000 in and sitting at table 11 at someone else's celebration. The first night, 9 women showed up. By the third month, there were 22. At the end of one of those sessions, a woman maybe 10 years older than me came up afterward and said, "I wish I'd had this 20 years ago. I might have kept my name off a lot of things." She smiled when she said it, the way people smile when a thing is both true and too late. I smiled back and said, "You can start now." That's the thing no one tells you when you're in the middle of it. When you're covering the florist deposit and co-signing the contract and sitting quietly at table 11 and telling yourself it's fine, it's family, it's what you do. No one tells you that stopping is also something you do. That saying no is also an act of love. For yourself, if not for them. My sister got her house eventually, not with my name on it. And I got something back that I hadn't even realized I'd been missing. The quiet satisfaction of a life that is completely, legally, fully my own.